Assalamu alaikum. I was telling this story to Amir, and he thought it was interesting and I should share it to you guys. It's a story about something that happened to me when I was younger, a younger experience. So this one night, I was at home with my brother, and my parents were out. They were out on something, I don't know what they were out on. And I was getting ready to go to bed, and my brother was already sleeping. We used to share a room. Our beds used to be next to each other. So I was getting ready to go to bed. I went onto my bed and I laid down. And I just laid down, and then I remembered that I left the bathroom light on. So I got up to turn it off. And when I got up, I looked. Usually you could tell through the door. You could tell if the light was on or off. And I looked, and it was completely dark. And my brother was fast asleep right next to me, so I was like, okay, maybe I I turned it off and I didn't know. So I just ignored it, and I laid down and went to sleep, or I tried to go to sleep. And so it's after a good 5 minutes, I started hearing this scratching noise, and it was right somewhere in the room, and I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I got up and I looked around. And I looked at my brother. I was like, maybe it's my brother, but he was still. So, and then I just scanned the room, and I come to right in front of my bed. And there's these 3 fingers that are just coming up right in front of my bed. So I got freaked out. And these fingers, they weren't normal fingers. They were deformed fingers. They looked like claws kind of, and the fingernails were really long, and they looked like they were made out of bark. And I freaked out. So I jumped up to my brother's bed, and I put his covers over my head. And I was just freaking out. I started shaking my brother, telling him, wake up, wake up. There's this hand right on my bed. And he just stayed asleep. He stayed fast asleep. I was shaking him, really, violently shaking him. And he just stayed asleep. So I just stayed still for 5 minutes. And then I wanted to see if it was still there. So I kind of peeked through the covers, and I saw this some deformed figure standing at my doorway. And it started walking towards me with that same hand just starting to extend to me as if it wanted me to shake it or take it, wanted me to take his hand to take it so that he could take me somewhere. And of course I didn't take it. I just pulled the covers back on my head. I was really frightened, and I just stayed that way for the rest of the night, stayed in the same position, the same way, and with my head covered. And I woke up for Fajr, and it was gone. So I just went on with my day, and that night, the second night, I went to sleep. I came to go to sleep again. So I laid down, and then I hear the same scratching noise, again, and I was freaking out. And I just put the covers right away on top of me. And this time I peek to see if it's the same thing. And this time, again, I see the hand coming towards me, the same hand, deformed hand. And this time, a voice, not coming from the guy, but coming from the hand. And he was saying, "Come, take my hand before I take your hand." And so I freaked out, and I put the covers over my head, and I stayed still the whole night. I was freaking out. I barely had enough sleep because I was just so frightened. And I woke up for Fajr, really drowsy. It wasn't there. I went on with the rest of my day. And I went, the third night, when I went to sleep, I laid down to my bed. And that night, and from then on, it never came back again. And that's my story for you guys.
Okay. The purpose of the story was that nowadays, many people are afraid of this thing, a jinn, or gossip, or ghost, something like that. So every time someone is at their house alone, dark, or they're going to their garage or outside to throw the garbage, they won't do it because they think the jinn's gonna jump from nowhere and just attack them. SubhanAllah, we know in Islam that al-jinn isn't smarter than a 10-year-old. And if you have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your thoughts and in your mind, you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is protecting you. So there is no reason to be afraid of this jinn. Also, we need something to cover up for this kid. Now, like in the long run, many people, millions of people are being forgotten. They're dead. You know, millions of Johns, Alex, Ahmed, Yusuf, they're dead, they're gone. But there are only these few people that have made a mark in history. And after hundreds and thousands of years, they have been still being mentioned. Not in their city, not in their country where they were born, but in different countries. So now we are going to be listening to a great Sahabi who's a star, a giant, and a leader by one of our youth leaders. So for no further ado, Brother Amir.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. My dear brothers and sisters, my dear respected elders, and my dear beloved youth, we live in a society today, we live in a culture today, in a world where we cannot step outside of the front door of our house. We cannot turn on the internet. We cannot open the computer. We cannot open the television without constantly being bombarded with fitna, without constantly being bombarded with something that our eyes should not see and our ears should not hear. We are constantly being surrounded by these trials and these tribulations, and it has become so pervasive, it has become so widespread throughout our society that we have become desensitized to it, that our youth as well as our elders have become desensitized to this. And this fitna, just to illustrate how widespread it has become, I want to narrate an incident that happened on Facebook. I was on Facebook the other day, and something popped up on my newsfeed. I didn't want it to pop up, it just pops up. It's other people's posts. And this post was about a post that a girl wrote on a Muslim sister's wall. And this post was for a movie, for a YouTube video, a movie about a famous actress who died about 40, 50 years ago. And this actress's name is Marilyn Monroe. Now, if any of you know who this actress is, you know that what she is made famous for in this society, what she is revered for in this society, is none other than the disgusting, despicable act of zina, none other than fornication and adultery, and she is revered in this society for this. Now, the story doesn't end here. I was on Facebook, and subhanAllah, it's something that touched my heart, something that made me so afraid for our ummah, because this Muslim sister, she commented on this video, and what does she say? She says that Marilyn Monroe is a role model for our youth, that she is a role model. SubhanAllah. You see the youth, you see that they find, because they don't have their priorities in the right spot, they find role models in people like this, people who are made famous for committing horrible, disgusting acts like this. And it's not just for the sisters. Yes, well, the sisters, all they have to look forward to is these kind of people. Think about that. Think about what our sisters, what our daughters, what our mothers, what our aunts have to look at. But it's also for the brothers. The brothers who are walking out in the streets, the Muslim brothers who are walking on the streets and they've got their Beats by Dre over their head, and they're listening to these hip-hop artists, Kanye West, Kid Cudi, they're listening to all of this. And what are these hip-hop artists telling them? They're telling them to live this life, because this is the life worth living for. They're telling them to gamble their life away, to spend this money, to party, and to waste their life without any realization that there is a next life. But if you open the Quran, if you read the kalam of Allah, if you look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He says the exact opposite of this, my dear brothers and sisters. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us, and He tells us that it is only through seeking His happiness, it is only through pursuing the akhirah that we will find true happiness in the dunya. So let us strive, inshallah, to seek after the akhirah, because this dunya will get us nowhere. And to really illustrate, someone who not only had status, not only had fame, not only had money in this world, but he had the love of Allah and the love of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is one of the greatest men to ever set foot on the earth. That is Saad ibn Abi Waqqas radiyallahu anhu, also known as Saad ibn Malik, Farisul Islam, the Knight of Islam. For those of you who know anything about Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, he is a Sahabi that I chose to speak on today. Because before he was even born, while he was in the belly of his mother, he was already determined to be better than any of the human beings you see today. Any of the Lady Gagas, the Kid Cudis, the Marilyn Monroes of the world. Wiz Khalifa. Any of these people, he's better than all of them. Simply because of the blood running through his vein, because he had the blood of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam running through his veins, because he was the cousin of Amina, the mother of Rasulullah. And that automatically makes him better than any other human beings on earth today. But not just that, not just his blood. It is his acts, his life that we look at, and we see what an amazing person he is compared to the people of today. What an amazing person he was. Just to emphasize on his status, Saad ibn Abi Waqqas radiyallahu anhu, he was one of the 10 who was promised Jannah in this earth. Several times, on several occasions, he is one of the 10. And if you stayed with us for Shoulders for Giants before, you know that we made mention of this before. That there are these 10 men who we should all know and we should all strive to be like, who were guaranteed Jannah. Not only this, but during the Khalifa of Umar anhu, he was one of the 6 who Umar chose to be Khalifa after him. He was one of the 3rd or the 4th person to become a Muslim. And this is where we began our story about Saad, about his journey to Islam. He was just 16 or 17 years old at the time. He was like a lot of us sitting in this room, 16 or 17 years old, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam first received revelation. And if you know the society of Makkah around that time, you know the fitna that they went through. It's much like the fitna today where people only cared about partying and having fun. That is what he was surrounded by. And a 16-year-old in that time, he was aware, he had clear knowledge that this fitna, this dunya, which you hear over and over again, this word dunya, it will not benefit him. And even before Islam had came, he stayed far away from that. But then as soon as Abu-Bakr anhu approached him with the deen of Allah, as soon as he approached him with the message of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Saad ibn Abi Waqqas turned immediately to this deen. And he stood for it for his entire life from the young tender age of 16 or 17 years old. Now the people of Makkah, those who were not Muslim, they hated Islam so much. In fact, Saad's own mother, and before I get into this, I really want to emphasize the relationship between Saad ibn Abi Waqqas and his mother. Because if you wanted to see a relationship between a mother and a son as it should be, you were told to look at the relationship between Saad and his mother. Because there was no love greater than that love. There was no respect and no obedience greater than that love, and that respect and that obedience. So you look at Saad ibn Abi Waqqas and the relationship he had with his mother. But when his mother found out that he was a Muslim, when his mother found out that he became a Muslim, what did she say? She approached Saad and she said, "Oh Saad, I heard that you joined the religion of Muhammad." And she's saying this to her son. She says, "I swear by Allah, if you do not revoke this religion, I will not eat, I will not sleep, I will not drink, and I will not take shade from the burning, scorching heat of Makkah until I die." And it doesn't just end here. She says to Saad, "You will be blamed by the people. You will be ridiculed by the people for my murder. You will be my murderer. And this is what the people will call you." So the mother of Saad, you can imagine how much pain Saad is going through. His beloved mother torturing herself, but he is on the right path, because he is on the right path. So this goes on for one day. She's sitting outside in the scorching heat, no food, no water. This goes on for 2 days, and you can see the thirst in her eyes, you can see the pain on her face. And on the 3rd day, when she can barely walk, It is then that Saad ibn Abi Waqqas says something very interesting. And he says to his mother, Ya Ammi, O mother, I swear by Allah, if you had 1,000 souls, and you killed each one of them one by one, even then I would never give up this deen of Allah. I will never give up this deen of Allah. So if you want to eat, eat. And if you don't want to eat, then don't eat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loved this perseverance, loved this act of Saad ibn Abi Waqqas so much that He revealed ayat about this. And these are the famous ayat where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that we must obey and respect our parents unless they tell us to commit shirk, in which case we must disobey them but still respect them. And you see, even in this situation, this extreme situation, Saad ibn Abi Waqqas stood on the truth. He stood on the truth no matter what. And this is the first point that I want to mention. That you see nowadays in society, if anything happens that we want, if we want anything that goes against the deen, we don't even take a second thought, we pursue it. Like I was talking earlier, you know these youth who put on their Beats by Dre and then they're listening to these hip-hop artists and they're doing the hifz of the lyrics. You know, they're doing the hifz of the lyrics, they're memorizing the lyrics and they're reciting them over and over again. If you ever listen to what these hip-hop artists are saying, this is just a very small example. You hear the words that they're saying is absolute disgusting filth. Absolute filth. Yet these youth are saying it, and they don't realize that by doing this one small act, of trying to imitate these hip-hop artists, they're forsaking their own religion. They're forsaking the words and the commandments of Allah. So this is the first point I want to emphasize, and that is that Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, he never gave up his deen for anything. Even when his mother threatened to torture herself, he didn't give up his deen. So then why is it that our youth today, why is it that they feel the need to give up the deen for anything, just to imitate a hip-hop artist who has nothing in this world and nothing in the akhirah? I want you to all reflect upon this, because it is our youth today that have this issue. It is our youth who feel the need to give up the deen for the smallest thing that they find appealing in this dunya. Now Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, through his patience, through forbearing through this fitna that his mother placed on him, he went to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam and he asked Rasulullah to make dua for his mother, to make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings his mother closer to Islam. And subhanAllah, after Rasulullah ﷺ made that dua, Saad ibn Abi Waqqas reported, no sooner did his mother become a Muslim, no sooner did he hear her taking shahada, after Rasulullah made that dua for her. So subhanAllah, you see through the patience, through standing up for the haqq, to standing up for the truth of the deen, no harm will ever come to anyone. Because without him, if he hadn't been patient through that, if he hadn't shown that patience, then who knows if his mother would have ever become a Muslim. Now Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, as he grew older and he grew with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, it came time for hijrah. And Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, again, just to emphasize the status he had, he was given a right that no one else in the history of Islam will ever have. No one else in the history of the world, of this entire universe will ever have. And that was, he was the first person to shed blood for the sake of Allah in defense of Islam. He was the first person to defend Islam. And what was he known for? He was known for archery. He was a very skilled marksman with the bow and the arrow. So during the Battle of Badr, when the 315 brave Muslims fought against the 900-something Quraysh, in the Battle of Badr, we know that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the greatest of all people, and everything he does, he is the greatest at. At the time, if you know history of this time, before the Battle of Badr, warfare was very conventional in that it was attack, retreat. But Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, in his wisdom, he decided to change this. And what he did was he used these archers to constantly put an offense on the Quraysh. And it is because of this offense that the Battle of Badr was such a success for the Muslims. Now, actually, the leader of these archers was none other than Saad ibn Abi Waqqas. So he was one of the heroes of the Battle of Badr. Now, every single time Saad ibn Abi Waqqas would load an arrow during the Battle of Badr, he stood next to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, every time he would shoot an arrow, every time he would load that arrow, he would make one dua. And this dua was, "Oh Allah, make them lose their footing. Make them trip, make them slip, make them fall over, so that I can be more accurate in my aiming." And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, every single time he made this dua, every single time Saad made this dua, Rasulullah made another dua, "Oh Allah, accept the duas of Saad." But this dua of Rasulullah was not limited to the Battle of Badr. Ever since that day, ever since the Battle of Badr, Saad ibn Abi Waqqas reported that he never had a dua unanswered by Allah. He never had a dua unanswered by Allah. Every single dua he asked for came true. And just to illustrate this point, I want to go to much later in his life, when Saad ibn Abi Waqqas was a ruler of the small village of Kufa. And there was a man, and he was insulting Ali ibn Abi Talib, radiyallahu anhu. He was insulting Ali. So Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, he gave this man a warning. He said, "Don't you know that Ali is to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam as Harun alayhi salam is to Musa alayhi salam, except that there is no prophet after Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Don't you know this is the status of Ali? This is the status of the man who you are cursing. So you have no right to say these things about him." But then the man still continued to curse Ali. To this, Saad ibn Abi Waqqas became very, very upset. And he went into the masjid and he made wudu and he prayed 2 rakat of nafal. And then he raised his hands and he made a dua against this man. And just to illustrate how amazing the dua of Saad is, how amazing it is that every dua he made came true, Saad made the dua against this man. And it was said that no sooner after he made that dua did a camel rush into the village of Kufa. A camel rushed into the village of Kufa, had its eyes dead set on this man, trampled him to death. Subhanallah. You don't see that anywhere. It's only through this amazing, miraculous dua that Saad has. And there's another incident of how powerful the dua of Saad is. That during the Khalifa of Umar radiallahu anhu, during the Khalifa, Saad was walking with one of his servant girls. He was walking with her, and it was a windy day outside. So the wind was blowing, and Saad was walking with the slave in one direction, and Umar radiallahu anhu was walking in the other direction. So they were walking towards each other. Now, since it was so windy, the clothing of the servant girl got blown to the side, and her aura was exposed. And Umar radiallahu anhu, being the giant he was and being the intimidating figure he was, he became infuriated with this. He became really upset. So he raised his whip as if he was about to whip her and whip Saad. But then Saad immediately, he raised his hands to Allah and he began to make a dua. But then, you see, this is Umar radiallahu anhu. Umar is a giant. He is literally a giant. But even though he was Khalifa, he was Amir al-Mu'mineen, he ran to Saad. He ran to Saad and he fell to his knees and he gave Saad this whip and said, "Saad, whip me, just don't make dua against me. Don't make dua against me. Just take this whip and whip me instead." You see what respect Saad ibn Abi Waqqas had. What respect he had by the Sahabas, because he was so revered, so honored by his people. After the Battle of Badr, I just want to take one more quick tangent. So Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, on another incident, he was approaching Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And I want you all to pay attention to this because this is very, very important. It's amazing how true this is. Because Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, he approached Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He approached Rasulullah and he asked Rasulullah to make a dua specifically for him, that all his duas are accepted. So he asked Rasulullah to make a dua specifically for Saad. To which Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said something to Saad, but by saying that, he was addressing the entire ummah. He addressed the entire ummah by answering this question. And he said, "Saad, if you want your duas to be answered, then make sure that your food is halal. Make sure your food is halal. And I really want to emphasize this point, because how often is it in today's society that our Muslims, that our ummah says, we're making dua for others. How come none of it's coming true? How come Allah's not answering our duas? You hear it all the time. But did you ever consider, maybe it's because the food you're eating is haram. Maybe it's the means, maybe it's your money is haram. Maybe your means are haram. Did you ever consider that? Did you ever consider maybe your money, because it's coming from interest? That's why you never get your du'as answered. Because you have to realize, from studying the lives of these Sahaba, that nothing happens without the permission of Allah. That you will not get anything without the permission of Allah. So why should He give you something if you're trying to obtain it from haram means? Why should He give you anything if you're trying to obtain it from haram means? So after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told this to Saad said, he reported that I had made sure that every single food I had ever eaten, after that day I made sure I knew where it came from. And as a result of this, as a result of how much importance he showed to this, no dua he ever made went unanswered. No dua he ever made went unanswered, just like the story of Kufa and the camel that I just narrated. Now, as life goes on, Saad ibn Abi Waqqas is appointed for the battle of Uhud. And in the battle of Uhud, he's given a very special role, and he's really, really honored. And this is where you see how amazing of a person he is. So Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, during the battle of Uhud, in one day, he was given the honor of firing 1,000 arrows by the side of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. 1,000 arrows, but it doesn't just end here. He doesn't just fire 1,000 arrows, that's it. No, he fires 1,000 arrows, but every single arrow was handed to him by the blessed hand of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Every arrow was handed to him by who? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Still, the honor doesn't end here. Still, it doesn't end here. Even after this, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after handing every single arrow, Saad puts each arrow to the bow, and before he fires, Rasulullah makes a dua, a very specific dua. He says, Saad, may my mother and my father be sacrificed for you. And he says this 1,000 times. And just to emphasize how amazing it is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is honoring Saad like this, Ali ibn Abi Talib anhu narrated that Rasulullah had never made dua of the sacrifice of both of his parents for one person, except Saad. And on that day he did it 1,000 times. SubhanAllah. Now, we get into the most amazing part of Saad ibn Abi Waqqas' life. The most amazing part of his life. And that is the Battle of Qadisiyah. And if you know what the Battle of Qadisiyah is, you know that this is during the Khalifa of Umar radiallahu anhu. And this is part of the conquest of Persia. In fact, this is the defining battle of the conquest of Persia. And since it was a conquest, since they were trying to push the Persians back rather than Persians invading them, Umar radiallahu anhu realized, I have to stay here. I can't leave my people. Since this is his Khalifa, since he was Amir al-Mu'mineen, he had to stay in Mecca and Medina. He had to look over things over there. So who does he appoint? These 3,000 Muslims against 120,000 Persians. Think of those numbers. 40 times more Persians. For every single Muslim, there's 40 Persians. And he appoints none other than Saad ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu over these 3,000 Muslims in this battle. And Saad ibn Abi Waqqas was such an amazing general. He was such an amazing leader of these people. He was such an amazing leader that he used the tactics and the wit and the intelligence that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught him, and he pushed the Persians back all the way beyond the Nile. All the way beyond the Nile, and they retreated beyond the Nile. At this, the Persians thought that they had won, because the Muslims had never seen the Nile before. They had never seen such a big, vast body of water, because they're coming from Mecca and Medina, where there is no body of water. So they thought they had won, or they thought that they had saved themselves, and that the Muslims wouldn't be able to do anything. But Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, he sends mail to Umar radiallahu anhu. And this is a very famous incident where Umar radiallahu anhu, he sends a mail not back to Saad. He sends mail to the Nile. He sends a letter to the Nile. And in this he's telling the Nile that if it is by the permission of Allah for you to remain calm, then remain calm. And then after that, the Nile was calm. So then Saad ibn Abi Waqqas was the general, he was the commander and the leader of this military that pushed these people who took his 3,000 Muslims and pushed them over the Nile. And it's narrated that they used their own cavalry, they used their own horses to run through the Nile. And they made it to the other side of the Nile on foot with just horses. Can you imagine that? That you see, imagine yourself as one of the Persians, and you're on the other side of the Nile, and you're saying, you're thinking that you're safe now because the Muslims can't come get you because they don't know how to cross the Nile. But then you see them actually coming on horse. You see this miracle of Allah in front of your eyes, led by Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, and it's absolutely amazing. Because at that, the Persians realized that they had no capacity to overcome the miracle of Allah. That these people have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on their side. There's no way we can beat them. And it is Saad ibn Abi Waqqas who led these people to victory. It is Saad ibn Abi Waqqas who led them to victory over the people, over the Persians. And the Persians had given up after the Muslims had crossed the Nile. And the honor of the Battle of Qadisiyah, this is the name of the Battle of Qadisiyah, is not in the battle itself. It is this battle that was prophesied by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam during his lifetime. Where Rasulullah said that one day the Persians that the Muslims will win over the Persians, and Saad ibn Abi Waqqas was the means. He was the means by which this was fulfilled. He was the means by which the prophecy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has been fulfilled. So you see throughout his entire life, up until this point, everything he's done has been centered around this amazing man, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So his own life must be truly amazing. After the Battle of Qadisiyah, Saad ibn Abi Waqqas was given control over the village of Kufa, and he was given control over this land. And it's said that after the Battle of Qadisiyah, so the Persians, they were Zoroastrians, they were fire worshippers. And they had a fire that was lit for thousands upon thousands of years. It was their fire god. And they worshipped this fire god that they had in their palaces. But it's said that Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, he walked up to one of the big palaces, the White Palace. He walked up in that White Palace and it was time for adhan. So he made the adhan. And as he was making the adhan, this fire that has been kindled for thousands upon thousands of years, this fire that has been lit, it went out as he made adhan. Such is the miracles that have been attributed with Saad ibn Abi Waqqas. Such are the amazing accomplishments of Saad ibn Abi Waqqas. And he was given control over Kufa until much later in his life. And it was during his reign in Kufa that he became rich and he got so much money. But even so, with all of this money he had, he still donated it all generously. He still donated it all for the sake of Allah. And that is another point. That you see how money corrupts us today. That you see these famous actresses and actors, they have all the money, all the riches, all the fame in the world. But then how do they die? A lot of them die from drug overdoses because they will never find true happiness. But Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, he was given this money and he spent it all for the sake of Allah because he realized it didn't matter. Because he had Allah's happiness. He had the happiness of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wa radu an. He was one who Allah was happy with, and that's what made him happy. So as Saad ibn Abi Waqqas became old, he was rich, he had fame, he had status, he had it all. But then he was struck with the calamity, and he lost his vision. He lost his vision, so he couldn't see. But he went on with this lifestyle. So he couldn't see. But his people came up to him, and they said, Saad, every dua you've ever made comes true. Every dua you've made for our sake has come true. Why don't you just ask Allah to give you your vision back? And it is a response of Saad that really touched my heart. It's something that really touched my heart. Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, what does he say? He says my entire life I have been honored by Allah. My entire life I have been given status. I have been given fame. I have been given everything that this dunya can have to offer. I was made the hero of the battle of Qadisiyah. I was able to fight in the battle of Badr. I was able to stand by the side of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I was promised Jannah. Why would I ask Allah for anything else? I am shy of asking Allah for anything else. You see how amazing it is. How amazing. How through all of this fame and all of this status, it only increases him in his own humility. But you see today, as soon as someone gets a taste of fame, they become arrogant about it and they think they're a hotshot. As soon as you have a little bit of fame, a little bit of money, you see people today become so full of themselves. But you see the Saad ibn Abi Waqqas only increased in his own humility because he was shy to ask Allah for anything else. He was shy to ask Allah. As he approached his death, as Saad ibn Abi Waqqas approached closer and closer to his death, he had a conversation with his son. He was on his deathbed, and he had this conversation with his son Musab. And he asked his son to bring a garment in a so-and-so closet, so-and-so place. He asked his son to bring this garment. So his son brought this garment, this old, decrepit garment. And Musab asked him, what is this garment? And Saad said, this is the garment that I had from the battle of Badr. And I'm just narrating this because it's amazing the honor of the people of the battle of Badr, that he held on to this one garment, this one decrepit garment for 50 years, simply because of the honor that the people of the battle of Badr had. And he brought this garment out and he wanted to be buried in this garment because he wanted to be remembered as a hero of the battle of Badr. As he wanted to be remembered as someone who fought in jihad for the sake of Allah in the battle of Badr. So then when his son asked him, what is this garment? He said, this is the garment from the battle of Badr. And he went on to say, the honor of the people who fought in the battle of Badr, that Jannah is wajib upon them. So he told Musab, do not be afraid. Do not be scared for my sake when I die. Do not be sad because Jannah is wajib upon me. In fact, he went on to tell his son that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on several accounts had said that that he is a man who will be promised Jannah. He is one of the 10 who was promised Jannah in this life. So he should not be afraid. And he went into detail about this, about how he was promised Jannah. And this is what I want to end with you all here today. That Saad ibn Abi Waqqas was promised Jannah. And this was narrated in a halaqa that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was sitting in. He was sitting in a circle in the masjid. He was sitting in a circle, and then he said, the next person who comes to that door right there, the next person is promised Jannah. Lo and behold, 5 minutes later, Saad ibn Abi Waqqas walks through that door. Same thing happens the next day. He's sitting in a halaqa. And Rasulullah says, the next person who walks through that door is guaranteed Jannah. Saad ibn Abi Waqqas comes through that door. And this happens a third time. Saad ibn Abi Waqqas walks through that very door. So then one of the Sahabi that were sitting with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the Sahaba, Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-S, he was sitting with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he tried asking Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what makes this guy so special? Why is he guaranteed Jannah? Why is he amongst the 10 who are guaranteed Jannah? So Rasulullah says, why don't you find out for yourself? So this Sahabi, he makes an excuse to stay with Saad ibn Abi Waqqas for 3 days. He makes this excuse to stay with him for 3 days. And in this 3 days, he's kind of just shadowing him. He just wants to know, what's up with this guy? What's so special about this guy? And he stays with him morning and night for 3 days. And he comes to the conclusion, there's nothing special about him. Nothing he does is special. His worship is the same as my worship. He goes to the masjid as often as I do. He prays the same way I do. Nothing he does is special. So then what's up? So then Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, after the 3rd day, he asked this Sahabi, he asked him, why are you following me for 3 days? Is there something you want to know? So then Abdullah ibn As, he comes clean and he says, well, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told me that you were promised Jannah. He told me you were promised Jannah. So I just wanted to know, what's so special about you? Why are you promised Jannah? What makes you so much better than everyone else? And how can I implement that in my own life? So he was actually doing this for ilm. He was doing this for knowledge. That he wanted to know how can he be promised Jannah? And Saad ibn Abi Waqqas says, this is my worship. This is what I do. I don't do anything special. This is it. So then the Sahabi, he began to leave. He was upset. He was depressed. So he started leaving, put his head down, he started walking away. But then at that moment, Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, he says, wait, there is something. And he says, every night before I go to sleep, I forgive all of those who transgress against me. I forgive all of those who have wronged me. I forgive everyone who has done something against me. Every single night, this is what I do. And you learn from this. And you learn how amazing it is that Saad ibn Abi Waqqas, from the get-go, from the beginning of his life, he was honored. He was born with the blood of Rasulullah running through his veins. He was honored by fighting in the battle of Badr. He was honored by firing the first arrow in defense of Islam. He was honored in the battle of Uhud. He was honored in the battle of Qadisiyah. He was honored so many times. He was allowed to die blind. And we all know that what an honor it is to die blind for the sake of Allah. Yet the thing that made him promised for Jannah, the thing that he was promised to Jannah for, was not this jihad, was not the struggle for the sake of Allah, was not the battle of Badr, the battle of Uhud, the battle of Qadisiyah, was none of this. What he was promised Jannah for, my dear brothers and sisters, was because he forgave others. And this is something we need to implement in our lives. This is something we need to understand, that how often is it that we make dua for ourselves, that we make dua for ourselves and for our mother and our father and for our siblings, but we never make dua that Allah forgive those who have wronged me. We never care about those who have wronged us, because in our short-sightedness, all we see is hatred against those who have wronged us, and we are unable to forgive those who have wronged us. But you see, it takes a great level of humility. It takes all of this humility to direct all of this anger that we might have had at one point and realize that it's not worth it, that dunya is not worth it. And you don't want to hold them back. You don't want to hold your brother and sister back from akhirah. And you want to forgive them. That is what sets Saad ibn Abi Waqqas apart from all the rest of the sahabas. Not that he was in the battle of Badr or the battle of Uhud. While those are amazing things, while those are amazing accomplishments, the thing he was known for, the thing he was made famous for, the thing he was honored for the most, was how he forgave all those around him. And I want to leave you all with this idea. I want to leave you all with this understanding, with this knowledge, that we should forgive those around us. We should forgive those who have wronged us, because everyone sins. Everyone sins. That we are all the son of Adam, and Adam himself sinned. So we all will sin. Everyone will sin. So let us take this anger that we might feel and turn it into forgiveness for our brothers and our sisters. Because it is said, the very famous hadith, that none of you have true iman until you love for yourself what you love for your brother or sister in Islam. And this is a living representation. Saad ibn Abi Waqqas is a living representation of this humility, of this love, and of this forgiveness. And I want to leave you all with this idea, inshallah. I make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to benefit from the words that were said about Saad ibn Abi Waqqas. I make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to forgive all those around us. And I make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives us for our sins. If I said anything wrong, then it was from myself and from shaitan. If I said anything right, then it was from Allah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.